Guess we'll get started then. So, for you four and everyone watching, my name is Tim Latterner. I'm the design editor at Domino magazine, and we're here talking with for interior photographers about kind of the state of your industry and how, more or less, how interior photography sort of can help deliver the message that certain interiors are trying to convey, and more or less how you're sort of working with clients, meaning designers, on bringing their projects to new kinds of mediums like magazine media or online digital media. So I'd love to, I guess, start by maybe just introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about maybe where you're from and what you do.
Okay.
Molly, if you want to start.
Sure. Hey, I'm Molly Rose. My business name is Mall Goodman Photography. It's all very confusing. I'm having clearly an identity crisis about it. I just got married. So I'm based in Orange County, California. I'm an interior and architectural photographer, and I work equally across the board with interior designers and builders and architects. And so it brings a lot of diversity to my work. In Southern California, we have a variety of architecture. It's a lot of fun, and it keeps me on my toes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Delaney. I am based, as Molly said earlier, I am Boston adjacent, right next door. And I'm also an interiors photographer. I work, sounds like very similar to Molly. I mainly work with interior designers, but I do also love working with contractors and architects and everybody's very creative eye that I get to work with all the time. So that's me.
Let you go first, Katie.
Thanks. Kind of the same as you two ladies, interior design photographer, and I work with the whole gamut from the ground up, foundation to the sofa finally being delivered. I love creating a story with my work, and interior designers, contractors, architects, and all the things in between. So I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and traveling across the Southeast most of the time for work. And I love what I do.
I'm Clarence Gabriel. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, though I'm from California. So shout out to my California folks on this call. I am a interior design and real estate photographer here in Atlanta, working with interior designers, builders, real estate agents, you name it. Love it, actually. I like Katie. I really appreciate sort of finding the story, like kind of finding the message that that specific space, room, home, building has to tell.
So I guess a good place to start is maybe, because I obviously, working at Domino, know you from your work in the interiors game, but looking through some of your portfolios, you've also worked in other kinds of topics, whether it be, say, food or travel or other sort of photography. How did you, as a photographer, kind of come to start working on interiors, and how does that process on a given job for a client work differently than maybe some of your other fields, and how do they inform each other?
Great question.
Clarence, if you want to start.
All right, we'll do. Well, yeah, I shoot all types of photography. Honestly, I shoot portrait photography. I shoot fashion. I shoot products. How does that inform how I communicate with my clients, or even inform the work that I produce for my clients? I think more so than the types of photography, it is the background. My education is in marketing, and I'm 45. Most of my career has been in some form of marketing. So what I understand mostly is how to tell a story, how to convey a message to somebody. You tell me what you want to convey and I'll find it. That's what I do best. And I think that's why people hire me. It's especially in real estate. I know how to sort of shadow the unfavorable parts of a home or a building. And we sell a house. We sell houses regularly. It's just about understanding. For me and my clients, it's really about understanding what they are trying to message. If it's, yeah, I'll leave it at that and let somebody else tag on.
I'll jump in. I started actually as a portrait photographer, in a sort of a second life after I had kids. I've always had a passion for photography, and once I had babies, I was in finance before that, but I really fell in love with taking pictures of people. And then we moved into a new home, and I just poured over interior design magazines constantly. I was super into design, and all of a sudden I started seeing like people in shots, and I was like, so I love interior design, I know how to shoot people, how can I, make a career out of this particular vein? So, I went back to school. I just started networking my way through the industry, really, trying to get involved with as many things as I could find that had anything to do with interior designers. So that's kind of my career path. And as far as your question about informing, when creating a story about a home or a project that I'm photographing for a client, I think it's really important to, like we've mentioned, like tell the story about who lives there, and if I can photograph a pet or a person or a child or the, husband or wife chopping vegetables in the kitchen, I think it just makes the whole story really feel alive and see like, oh, okay, that's how they live in that space. I think, it's important to kind of tell that story. Probably, at Domino, I would presume like it's important to kind of envision what happens in all those different spaces. So that's, I guess, kind of one thing that I think crosses over when I think about shooting portraits versus interiors.
Jump in? I don't want to
Sure.
interrupt. But,
No, please.
Beautiful, by the way. So I kind of fumbled my way into interior design. It was kind of like the path hit me. I wasn't necessarily taking that path. I was in California and Santa Barbara. So shout out West Coasters on here, for about 5 years. And I've always loved photography, jumped in a class, and for about 2 years playing around with all sorts of mediums in photography, never necessarily trying to make money with it, but just really loving the form in itself. Got back to Charleston randomly, and I was like, well, I'm going to try to make some money off of this. And a local magazine out here was looking for interns. I interned my way into this thing, and I just worked my butt off for free. And I figured, I'll do food, I'll do travel, I'll do people, I'll do all the things, just getting my eye sharp. And the one job I took for this internship, out of many, led me to meet an interior designer, and we hit it off. She loved the photos. She fired her other photographer that she was using, and she wanted me on board. And she's like, hey, you're good at this. I'm like, I am? And I said, okay, great, sounds good. And I ran with it. And that was about 7 years ago now. And her business has completely taken off, and we're just growing together, and it's a beautiful thing. And as far as having different sorts of tabs on the webpage, like travel, people, all the things like that. It's funny because when I was in school, one of my teachers said, you can't be 100% perfect at everything. Choose one thing to be good at. And while I don't stick to that, I do find some truth in that. And I think I put some travel on there because I just want to travel, guys. I mean,
let's be honest.
Let's be honest. So if you want to hire me at a hotel in Costa Rica, let's go. But
I love that. And I love what you said, Katie, about keeping your eye sharp, or like getting your eye sharp, because I think that's a huge part for photographers. Sometimes that's why we start in other areas. It's like, maybe this isn't the most sensitive area for me in terms of like, I need to be a wedding photographer, but it does kind of help you figure out those different things that you're looking at. Maybe it even helps you like learn how to shoot greenery. I mean, that's in terms of styling for interior design, knowing how to shoot certain things because you have a diverse background, I think is really important. My long story short, I mean, I shot everything, but my mom is actually an interior designer. She's been an interior designer for 35 years probably. And so when I graduated from college and I wanted to become a photographer, she was like, oh, come on, just do interior photography. So it took me quite a few years to get into this. And then I always tell people I grew up in houses that weren't my own. And I think that that's really true, because now I see, all these beautiful spaces, and I just feel like I'm at home. I feel very emotionally connected to being in homes. And so that informs my career, and that informs my shoot by being able to, and I said this a little bit earlier, but being able to connect the dots from Spanish style to modern to transitional farmhouse, a Palm Springs
Molly, you're breaking
rancher,
up a little bit
being
there.
able to connect those dots across a portfolio. Oh shoot, I'm sorry. Maybe if I
No,
slow
it's
down
coming
or
through.
something. Okay, I'll slow down a little. I'm a very fast talker. But being able to connect those dots through different types of houses and everything, I think that's where my background has really strengthened my career and how I feel pretty confident in able to say to a client, yeah, we can shoot these different types of projects and your portfolio will still look consistent. So that's kind of how I've seen my background and my work come together.
Jumping into the more business aspect of it then, I mean, obviously a lot of this stems from being hired or being kind of commissioned from a designer, whether it be early on with colleagues, maybe from, in Molly's case, your mother, and then learning and meeting new designers from that. But how does that process work, I guess? Like at what point in a designer's process do you want to be booked essentially to come and eventually be doing the photographs of the finished project? And how does that sort of vetting process work where you're looking at a project saying, this is something that I am a good fit to take on as the photographer? The same way that a designer would be vetting a client of theirs for a good fit for a home project. Jessica, if you want to start. Sorry.
Okay.
Feel free to jump in with these two.
I know, I just want to talk over people. So I think my recommendation always for clients that I've worked with before that we have, you know, a good working relationship, it's always just get me in as soon as possible before things are sort of nicked up and dinged up and, you know, the cat pees on the rug and whatever else happens. So, you know, I've had it where I'm hired during install and we kind of just work through the home. It is perfectly laid out, gorgeous, ready for the client to move in the next day. And those photographs always come out beautifully. You know, and there's been other times too where it might be an older project, but they are, perhaps the homeowner might be moving out and the client's like, I never got a chance to photograph that, but it's still one of my favorites. You know, can we go back or whatever? And the answer is of course. And the best day to do it is after the cleaning lady comes, right? Because that it requires a lot less on site during that day. As far as working with new clients, I definitely think that it's sort of non-COVID times. I love to meet my clients beforehand, whether it's for a cup of coffee, glass of wine, just to kind of meet them, say hello, see what each other's personalities are like. And it's also a chance to kind of go through their portfolio. I mean, everybody has an iPhone and pictures on their phone. So you can kind of like, oh, this is the project that I was thinking about photographing. What do you think? And you get a chance to kind of get a view of them and a view of their style. And you can kind of see if it's a path that you want to go down. I think it's always a good starting point. So that's kind of a little bit about the business side of it for me. I
agree a lot with you, Jessica. I learned, so I didn't talk about my path into photography. It was totally a fluke, really. Like it was never intended to be a career for me. But I've learned along the way that not every project is a good project or even good money. Mm-hmm. And not every project adds to your portfolio. Over the course, I personally have only been shooting professionally for like the last 4.5 years. I've been shooting amateur. I used to use my camera just to walk around downtown LA when I got frustrated, like with a design project of my own, like, furniture or something. And I would just grab my camera and go shoot details of buildings. And suddenly buildings were hitting me up on Instagram, like, can we use these photos? Not that that was cool. But the business side of it, these days, I'm fortunate enough these days to pick my projects. Like it has to inspire me. And
what are you looking for in a project? Like what does make a good or bad project from something to shoot?
I don't know that there's a bad project, but I'm looking for something that is interesting and alive and is vibrant and tells some sort of story. Whether it be a completely minimalistic story, you can still look at it and be like, oh, this is cool, even though everything is one color. or you have something that is just full of color, pattern, and texture. There's a lot of, I don't want to diminish anyone's skill, because oftentimes a designer's finished project is set by their clients. But there's just a lot of boring projects out there. and I just am blown. The last time I took a job that I really just wasn't in love with, it was a designer that I've worked with multiple times, and she asked me to come, and I went to this house, and I was thinking, like, this is what you hired me to shoot? I was like, well, where's the job?
Well, I think it's really important to, like, upfront let clients know, like, this could be a project that they are super proud of, whether a new designer or experienced designer. I think more experienced designers know the difference, but like maybe sometimes with a newer client or a newer designer, they're super excited. Maybe it's like a big budget for them, but they need to realize, like, just because it's a big budget and just because it's a project they're super excited about, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get press, right? Like,
right.
Everybody's dream is to get press, for sure. My clients, I try my best all the time for my clients to see if there's an outlet that would publish them. But as I'm sure you can speak to, Tim, like, it's tough. Like, the project needs to be super duper special to find a place in print.
You know,
Sure.
there is a trick that I've learned, and I mean, as an interior photographer, we do it anyway. Is really lead with the detail shots. The rooms are really great. The broad spectrum of the rooms are really great. But like when you can get like a detail that evokes something in somebody, whether it be the detail of a hand-formed metal table base, or a hammered paneled back of a chair. Those kinds of things, even sometimes just textiles, have been really very, very interesting on photos. And when you start looking through the detailed shots and the beads and whatever else they have in the room, and then you come out to the broader picture, you see how it all comes together. You're like, I get it.
Well, so to bring those kind of elements out, I mean, for instance, like Katie, are there, when you're in a project and you're starting to shoot and you get into the space, are there things that you kind of find yourself as a photographer looking at it through that, no pun intended, lens, are pulling out, like I know I need to like fix certain things that a designer maybe looks at it from a designer's perspective, but that as the photographer, whether it's turning off the lights to let the natural light flow in more, or things like that. Like, what are some things that you, being a photographer, are kind of fixing in projects when you're shooting?
Yes, I want to answer that. I would like to piggyback off of the last conversation we were
Sure.
just talking about. But I wanted to say that, yes, we all have those clients that are like, okay, we're probably not going to post this on Instagram, okay? But when that client comes to me and they're willing to put that budget on the table and say, I want to hire you, I don't care what it is, that means they're just so complimentary of my work that they think that something is special about me that I can bring out in their work. And so I think it's very important to not just, say, oh, well, this is aligned with my aesthetic and just take it away. Or I think that it's an opportunity to possibly, get to know someone, and they're always at the mercy of their own client. I mean, living in Charleston, South Carolina, there are so many signs like beach this way, and they just, what are they going to do? But I think it's important to understand that they're coming to you because they see something special in you that you might bring out in their work. And so I think it's a very collaborative event. And while some projects aren't super exciting and colorful or minimalistic and contemporary, all the things, I think that because we're professionals, we can find that vignette that they can post on Instagram and they get a ton of likes and they feel great about themselves. So moving forward onto that question about fixing things. So it's all the time. And very rarely do I ever go onto a shoot where we're not moving something. I often tell people I double as a furniture mover, and I prepare myself to be moving a lot of things. So whether my last shoot on Monday, Tuesday, we were moving sofas. We were, just moving everything just to get that perfect angle. Pillows, the throws, books. I really do appreciate it when a designer brings all the props that we need instead of the moving props, you know, oh, just go grab the book in the master side table and put it on the coffee table. I'm like, no, 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 no.
Right.
It's my intentions on any shoot I'm going into, whether it just be for their personal promotion, I want to make sure they have the chance and get in a magazine too.
Yeah.
So if we can get that shot done right without having to move a bunch of props, then why not, you know, prepare for your shoot as if those photos are going to become in a magazine without someone having to come reshoot it. So the pillows, the throws, the books, the plants, the florals, all the things. So I could go on for days. So let's another talk.
I mean, Molly, I guess same question then. Are there things specifically like within that, you know, anything specifically, you know, okay, I always find myself, you know, chopping pillows again or things like that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think every client is different, right? Just like our clients have clients who are different. There's always the one client who completely forgets greenery, or there's the client who doesn't even know what a pillow chop is, and maybe all their pillows are from Target, and you're like, oh, I saw this yesterday. This is the Studio McGee line from Target. It's beautiful. But there's that level of like, maybe that's not custom. So you kind of have to work with where your client is to some degree. And I love, Katie, your comment about moving furniture. I was in the camp of moving furniture a lot. And just recently I was lining up a shot and there was like a chair just sort of right in the frame. And I said to the client, can we move the dining table back so that that chair is not in the shot? And she goes, no, this space was designed intentionally. And I was so humbled by it because Katie, I'm in the same camp. I totally would be like, get it out of here. We want the perfect shot. Yeah. So as a photographer, I think every client's different. There's always something to consider, but the number one thing I'm looking for on every shoot is layers. I want the pillow, the chair, the architecture of the chair to be lined up with this beautiful piece of art with, you know, maybe it is the beads on the table or the tray that the homeowner collected when on their trip to India, whatever it is. I want all of those layers to be lined up in the shot so that you can really understand, again, that design intention. And so that's what I'm looking for when I'm on a shoot, besides the light and, you know, making sure my angles are right and those sorts of things. But I want to say, okay, what did you take into consideration when you were designing this room and synthesizing from the choice of your floors to the choice of your window treatments? Let's get all of that to tell the story of the room and in the combination of detail shots, vignettes, and the overall. That's kind of what I'm thinking about on a shot in terms of a shot list.
So then now, without naming names, are there things that have maybe happened in the past on past projects that were a bit irksome that now when you're taking on new clients and new projects that you're making it a point to kind of avoid? And, you know, whether it was, I don't know, I'd love to hear any stories from your past experiences of things that maybe problems that arose and now you kind of noticed you're clear of and how you do that. Clarence, if you want to start.
No, go ahead.
Or over Katie.
I was like, I got this one in my, I mean, I think that this is probably going to be the same for everyone. I started out, you know, not really knowing how to condense a shot list when I started doing interiors. I was like, yeah, let's shoot the house and let's just get what we can. And then you select the photos and I'll edit whatever you want. And I was like, no, this is not appropriate. This is not okay, because shoot days were like the worst thing ever. You know, starting at 7, ending at 7, we're grabbing like 30 photos or something crazy. And so it was something that I actually started doing without realizing I was doing it to myself. But now that I can see that a lot of interior designers, they think, okay, well, I'm hiring you for this day. We're going to shoot as much as we can. And it's like, ends up being a race to the finish line. And so now I know, after a couple of years being like, no, I have to have, this is 10 images in a day and that's it. And that's all we get. If we get a couple more because we're having fun and I see a different angle, then okay, we can discuss that. But if a client emails me or if a new inquiry comes in and they're emailing me a shot list or a Dropbox with scouting photos and there's like 40 of them, I'm like, okay, that's going to be like a 3-day shoot, you know? So now I've been able to condense and now I don't deal with that anymore because it was crazy.
So it's just kind of putting that out there up front, like
Up
this
front.
is clearly a 3-day thing, or
Yes.
setting
Yes.
your own parameters before
Absolutely.
getting into the weeds.
There's nothing worse than going and, you know, signing your job and getting into a house and there's like 5 bedrooms, exteriors, kitchen, library, and the designer thinks you're there for the day and you're supposed to shoot it all, and it's a mess. So yeah, that's what irks me out, is people who think I can shoot their house in one day.
Yeah.
Clarence, if you want to jump in, or if anyone else wants to jump in with any past stories, and again, not to throw any names out there, but just personal experiences.
Honestly, I think honestly for me, I don't. Yes, I've condensed my shot list too. I started with that. I learned that I was just, you know, let's shoot, and I would just shoot everything. But I really think just setting expectations up front is something that I do well now. Like, I tell them what they're going to get specifically. This is how much time you have. This is what we're going to do this day. And unlike you guys said you move a lot of furniture. I don't. I do not. If they have, you know, if they want to move furniture, I have indeed moved furniture before, but I've had to tell myself that that's not my job. I will tweak things to get the shot that we want to have, but I will not move. I'm not rearranging rooms. I will refuse. You know, we're already sweaty. I don't know about you guys. I end up sweating as I'm shooting photography, just shooting. And so I'm like, I'm not working out again. I'm like squatting. I'm doing all these different things. My legs are sore when I finish. I refuse to move furniture. And the other thing that too, like, I've had a couple of designers hire me on, you know, like you said, it's the day of install. They've got all these things done, and they're not ready. And then I'm like waiting around for hours. And then so I end up like helping stage and helping move furniture. That's not why you hire me. So I prefer, you know, I ask people up front, what's your schedule for the day? This is install day. What time are you guys starting? What time are you guys finishing? I will arrive at that time. You know, when you think you're like just touching things up. And then it helped me be a better person to provide better customer service to my clients, because I'll have an attitude. I'm not even gonna lie about it. I'll be mad. Like, I'm here for 2 hours, and like, this is, in my head, I scheduled to start at 2 and end at like 4. And it's like, now it took 2 hours to set up the place. So I usually just try to set up expectations and create timelines for the day so that I can just come in, I can just shoot, and then I can leave and we can all be happy.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something real quick. The furniture moving thing. I'm not moving fridges, okay? And I'm not uninstalling a dishwasher. I am just, there's a crew there, and we are all working together as a team. And if the sofa's got to go and it's going to make that image rock and be in the magazine, then we're moving that sofa, because we all want to be there. But I totally appreciate your attitude about, I'm here for one thing, I don't move furniture. I get that 100%, because listen, my feet hurt when I get done with the day. But when I see that photo in the magazine, I'm like kicking my feet up, like, yes, that was,
that was worth it.
That was
so, that's a good point. That's a good point that what I'm seeing now in Q&A too, is that when things do run over and you're kind of hit these unexpected things, how often are you then going back at the end of the job and saying, I'm tacking on for the extra time needed, or I was also staging and that's not really why you hired me? Like, how often are you going back to reassess sort of billing in that way?
So I've done a couple different things before. I worked with a client who actually didn't live in the Northeast. She was coming in from the Midwest, and she didn't have anybody with her. She was coming in the day or two before we were going to shoot, and I offered to help her style the place, just, you know, like, I'm an extra set of hands. So, you know, there's a certain fee that I would charge for that. That's not my my normal. I don't know about everybody else, but I charge like a half day or a full day. Half day is sort of anything less than 4 hours of shooting time, and full day is anything over that. So I'm happy to help in other ways, because I do think, like, we offer an eye that is helpful, you know, like we can get things sort of where they're supposed to be, but at the end of the day, we're most likely going to have to move around the coffee table styling items once or twice. Like I joke, we work in a game of inches, right? Like just a little bit that way. No, back 2 inches. No, okay, that's good. That's good. But so, and as far as like if things roll over or if things are going long, you know, I'm always happy to stay longer, but I might tack on like an extra hour of time for that.
Sure.
It's hard
And
here
then,
now when it's dark at like 4. So, but
in terms of actually like framing and styling what the shots are going to look like too, then I know as an editor, the things that, because I get sent project photography a lot, that you can always tell when things were shot with the idea of that it'll go into a magazine or a website or something like that for an interior design perspective, versus when things were also being used as real estate imagery for like a Zillow kind of site, and there's a shot always backed into the corner to get the full, to show how big the room is. I'm assuming that's the goal from a more real estate side, but how are you in each project kind of finding a balance between that each photo can have the most function, whether it's for pitching to a magazine or, you know, working on a real estate platform or something in that wheelhouse? Molly, if you'd want to start.
Yeah, I think for me, Clarence, probably you would answer the real estate portion of this question better. So I'm going to not answer that part. But in terms of, I'm just even going to say social and website versus editorial. This really goes back to one of the earlier questions of like, what is like problematic and not necessarily irksome, but I think what can be problematic is if the client doesn't necessarily communicate what their goal is for that project. And if they don't tell me, or if they don't know, if we don't do enough, if we don't talk about that enough to know that their goal is actually to be published in a magazine for this project, then it'll show in terms of like the styling not really hitting that note. So I think in some way, to answer the question, it can be like, I'm not dealing so much with the big wide corner shots, but I am dealing with like a flash in the pan Instagram post that somebody will be like, I need this content like for my Instagram now. And it's like very flashy and like grabs a lot of attention. And it isn't necessarily that high level design, thoughtful, very slow, maybe a quiet moment that I think you can really get into with editorial photography. So in that sense, I mean, I'm kind of dealing with that push and pull, that tug all the time, trying to get all of that on one shoot and saying like, okay, we're going to meet all of your goals of having a great website portfolio, an editorial feature, and 15 Instagram posts. It's like, I can't do that. So we have to kind of align, we have to narrow that down, figure out what the goal is. So I'm answering in a few different questions here, peppering a few different things in, but that's what I would say would be like, there's always that tug and that push and pull in terms of like how a photo is going to be used. But for the real estate portion, Clarence, I think you would be able to answer that better.
Yeah, excuse me. Real estate is a completely different beast. I don't view them the same. When I walk into a real estate shoot, depending on the type of house it is, it literally is, it's sort of very structured. Like you said, back into a corner from in every room, from two sides, from two angles, and if it's an oddly shaped room, maybe from 3. And then interior design, when you're shooting for a magazine, it really, you have the ability, the space to find those really romantic angles, like, you know what I mean? And you can get back, and it might be utilitarian because there might be some sort of large great room where you get the kitchen and you get the living room and you get a dining room setting, but like that, there's a sweet spot in this angle that might not be in the corner. It might, where you kind of get this sort of, I don't know what kind of angle that is, obtuse kind of an angle. And you get this whole thing is really romantic. They're just completely different beasts. I wouldn't approach them the same at all. I might approach them. The only time I would maybe marry the two if I'm doing a luxury property, you know, a couple $1 million property, and maybe has some wider space. You can get some of those things in there, like some of those kind of magazine angles, and make it more interesting because that's a different clientele. But like you said, for the most part, it really is about showing the features of the house, number one, showing how big the rooms are, and maybe most important, exterior, kitchen, master bedroom, master bathroom. You can literally eliminate the rest of the house, and most people will be happy with that. Happy with that. Oh, in the living room. And outside of that, it's just like, ah.
Well, it also works then to speak to Molly's point, maybe for everybody too, about the difference between shooting things that are meant to be an Instagram post eventually versus for something maybe that would get sent to me at Domino, which, because I know Domino being different than past design media outlets that I've worked at, I find projects, I'd say an equal measure between getting pitched things from a photographer or maybe a publicist versus I saw something on Instagram and then kind of traced it back and reached out and said, oh, I really like this living room. I'd like to see the rest of the home, and then finding them that way. So when you're in the shoot and you're kind of planning out both things, how are those divides different then? Jessica, if you want to.
I can jump in there. So for example, I recently worked on a project that had a great story for a long time client of mine. And we both wanted to, she said, what do you think about pitching this to one of the local magazines here? I thought it was a great idea because it does have a fun little backstory to it. And what I usually tell clients is, if we're shooting in hopes to get it published, we do need to find the mix, like the magic mix of the detail, tighter vignettes, but also the wider shots, and then how spaces connect. Because if you're writing a story about the space, typically the reader needs to be able to kind of move from space to space to space. So I try and make sure that we're always kind of, whether it's like you catch a doorway that looks into the main bedroom from the, another bedroom in the home, or how the kitchen relates to the dining room. Plus it's good for the designer so that they can really showcase how important it is for their work to kind of translate from room to room to room. So, and then as far as kind of wanting to use the images on Instagram too, because we all know Instagram's kind of like the beast that constantly needs to be fed, right? So I typically say, if we are trying to pitch it for publication, try and keep the sneak peeks on Instagram pretty tight. Like, you don't want to give away all the goodness. Tim, you could probably speak more to it than me, but it seems as though there's less of an opportunity for a special project to get published if they already feel like it's been out there all over Instagram. It's on the front page of your website. You are a blogger and you've already done a huge blog post about it, or whatever the case may be. It's kind of like you keep those special projects a little closer to the vest. Not to say though that you shouldn't use them at all, because let's face it, hiring an interiors photographer, like, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, and you should be able to use them, because at the end of the day, everybody is trying to like connect with their next best client, right? So you want to be able to have that work put out there. So it's a little bit of a dance, but I feel like that's like a little bit of the magic mix, I guess, keep things tight on Instagram, but.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, as an editor who kind of gets sent a lot of projects for consideration, there is a sense of we want the Domino story to be kind of the exclusive of the project. And I know, sometimes things, there's a tight shot of a coffee table that's maybe been styled a bit, or things that crop up on Instagram or in a portfolio. But I know, at least when I'm looking at things, there's definitely a conversation that happens internally with the staff that essentially asks, is this new? Are we going to be the one that are kind of like bringing this into the world?
Yeah.
May I ask a question though for the other photographers? Jessica, you brought up a really good point about your clients hiring a photographer, taking the time and the expense to pay for a photographer. What do you guys do when they don't use them at all? I have a photographer, client who she's hired me multiple times, and I've asked her if she shopped them. She hasn't done it. She doesn't post them on her Instagram, and I'm like, what are you doing with these photos? I'm just so curious. What do you guys?
I do think that there's an internal purpose for photos. I'll shoot projects where the homeowner has assigned an NDA and says, please don't publish these photos anywhere, not your website, not Instagram, anywhere, but it's for the designer. Yeah. It could be the case for your designer where they're like, look at this past project I did, where I did this herringbone tile versus this soldier set tile. Which one do you like better? So they might be doing it for that reason. You should ask them though, find out.
Well,
And it could inform like future shoots too.
okay. Good job. Thank you.
And like, I have some clients that really, it's not that they're scared of Instagram, but it's more like so overwhelmed. Like I have so many projects that I haven't really pulled from, like, I'm not, you know, I'm going to do that later, and then later never comes kind of situation, you know? But I, like Molly said, I think that that is also, you know, that does happen sometimes where it's like the client is so private that, you know, they are allowed, they allow the photographer to come in, but it is absolutely never to be shared. From the photographer standpoint or from the designer standpoint, it's like, you know, for their literally print portfolio that they can show in a meeting.
Okay. Just
I
curious.
do want to set aside some time to answer some of the questions that have been coming in through the Q&A too, because I know there's a bit of a timeliness to this. That I know one of the questions here is that any more pointers for pitching to publications, which I can definitely speak to. Personally, and editors in different magazines might feel differently about this. I think good ideas, it doesn't matter where good ideas come from. So I get pitched projects from photographers, I get pitched projects from publicists or from designers. You know, anyone's free to pitch me things. And then if there are good ideas, I mean, obviously, if a project gets picked up and, you know, greenlit for us to do a home tour on, we're mostly speaking to the homeowner and the designer. But I fully anticipate a photographer to maybe be able to just put me in touch with them or, you know, loop back that way. In terms of, I know one of the other questions here in terms of pitching was the difference between vertical and horizontal pictures, which I'm sure is an important thing that for you all to consider on site. I know at Domino there, or at any site really, it depends on what the website background looks like. I mean, on Domino is currently, you know, running on a WordPress background, or I know other sites have different custom ones, like other design media publications, especially for online platforms, that maybe a horizontal full bleed image makes more sense than using a vertical one, because for instance, when people look on their phones more,
Right.
and read things on their phones from an email newsletter or whatever. So I think in terms of pitching projects and what kind of photos you want, the most important thing is to consider, okay, you want to be able to publish this project. What are some goals of where you want it to be published? And what kind of imagery do you see happening most on those websites or magazines? The print magazines is different, but in terms of online, if you really like it in, you know, XYZ publication, what kinds of formats of images are they working on mostly? I think those are maybe the big things to consider in that.
I like to use horizontal or vertical shots, excuse me. I like to use vertical shots mostly for details. I usually will flip it for when I want to get something up close and really highlight something in that room. And the only other time I really use vertical shots is if I'm trying to capture the height of a room, like the whole height of a room, and or a narrow space. Like if I'm in a really wonderful powder room, I'll use a vertical shot versus a horizontal shot. There's no real way, unless you guys have any secrets that I don't know, there's no real way to capture a whole powder room in a wide shot. That's it. It's pretty much about the details in small spaces.
For me, form follows function. I like to look at like, what did the architect intend on this home? You know, so sometimes it just makes sense to shoot something vertically, or it just makes sense to shoot something horizontally. And this is where I think there can be a rub between an interior designer and a photographer until you're on the shoot and you're actually looking at the image, you know, tethered or in camera, wherever it is. And you can say, I can't necessarily explain why this looks better horizontal, but look at it compared to vertical. And having that conversation like right there, I mean, that happens with everything. It happens with styling. It happens with how a bed is made, with where the pillows land. I mean, how a throw is thrown. A lot of things happen kind of in camera. But in terms of what you're asking, like, where do we put these pictures? I think that a lot of our clients, well, I'll speak for myself, a lot of my clients don't necessarily yet have an idea of where it's going to be published. So they don't yet know, who's going to take this? Is it going to be print? Is it going to be digital? What's going to happen with this? So
Sure.
I cover my bases and I say, let's not necessarily shoot it all, but let's get a really healthy mix of things. And ultimately letting form guide the function. I mean, how the house looks, there's no reason to mess with it. What's the best way to shoot this to really represent the architecture of the home and the design intention?
I mean, there's also a question here speaking to that point on when someone like Domino or other magazines, I've formerly have been at places like Architectural Digest and elsewhere, that when do we send our own photographer to essentially not redo something, but to get pictures for a story we might be working on? And in my experience, this might differ for others. It's rarely been, when we're sent something that has a professional interior design photographer that worked on something, I've never had an experience where we've resent our own like photo team, because we have a great photo team at Domino. But they're more working on the things that we're creating custom images for are more when like I noticed something on Instagram that was like a really cool DIY project or of like a rental renovation on a kitchen. And for those, we'll use our own photo department, but it's rarely like if I'm sent a project from, I don't know, Pennsylvania that has, you know, great interior photographer, an interior photographer's great imagery, rarely are we ever going to like go and redo it ourselves. We'll either ask for more images on a certain thing, because if you're sent, I don't know, 12, 15 images in a Dropbox, maybe we ask if there are more that we can take a look at to get a different angle or approach to something. Or if I get sent something of a whole home, but we really want to make this a story about this kitchen renovation, we might ask for more pictures of the kitchen and go from there. But it's rarely a total overhaul.
I wanted to go off of what Molly was speaking about as far as the form and function. I think that going back to that question about the horizontal and verticals is just whatever the house speaks to your frame, I think is obviously important. But if I am shooting for a magazine, sometimes you don't have any creative freedom at all. And sometimes the layout is actually made for you already and the text is already ready. And so you're stuck to a certain frame. But in my mind, if I do have creative freedom, I'm looking for that hero shot. The hero shot in my mind is horizontal. If I'm flipping through a magazine, I see these beautiful vignettes, it's leading me to the story. And then all of a sudden I got that open up to that one horizontal, just 2 pages, and it's the hero shot. It makes me feel the whole story, and it's just incredible, and it finishes it all for me. So going into a house, I think 2 hero shots and pretty little vignettes all throughout and details, I think is a great story to tell. But I don't think that a hero shot has to be a horizontal, but it just is like wows you. But sorry to interrupt, but you were talking about.
No, I just want to, yeah. And by the way, if anyone watching has any questions they want to submit to, there's a chat button for it too that I'm just coming through. Something that someone else voiced earlier in our conversation was an instance in which an architect had used a photo of theirs without their permission that likely came from, say, the homeowner or someone, you know, worked it back, that, but for their own architecture firm's ad campaign that wasn't cleared from the photographer. How do you handle situations like that where it's obviously a licensing issue and a crediting issue, and how do you sort of mitigate those factors?
I'll go for it. I definitely have had this happen to me left and right, up and down, and I try to be very clear in my contracts, you know, third-party rights and all the things. But sometimes things slip up, and I have a lot of grace for people when it comes to images. Some people don't understand that it's someone else's intellectual property, and I have grace for that, because I don't know exactly what an architect has to do to make sure his contracts are complete. And if someone misreads the third-party rights in a different way, or they all of a sudden got this photo because of Instagram and they're resharing all the things, you know, I have grace. I speak up. I contact them, but I let them be aware. I'm definitely not going to go to the, you know, I'm not going to go to the court about it, but we have conversations about it.
One thing I think too, like I read the question specifically, sometimes there's only so much that you can do, even legally, like you can only enforce so much when the rule's been broken. I mean, there's not a lot that can be recovered when somebody's broken the rule. So sort of you're operating all the time on this honor system. I mean, you can sue somebody, but going to small claims court over an image, I mean, it's kind of a big ask. I mean, not a lot of people are actually going to do that. And that's not to say, go ahead and infringe on your photographer's contracts. I mean, that's like a terrible way to be in the world. But I think that there is some kind of delicacy that happens, that it's really a shame. You can have these contracts, but are they enforceable? Are you willing to enforce them? And so maybe as photographers, that's something that we can kind of peel back the layers on and say, like, well, what happens when our rights are infringed? Is there a layer of like, I never want to work with you again? Or what can we do that's actually, we can protect ourselves more than just like a legal pursuit? Because that's just not, we all work for ourselves. We represent ourselves in most cases. It's not going to happen. And I'm very much in Katie's camp of just having grace for the person, or at most asking them to pay for the rights to the photos retroactively. But that's also sometimes like, well, I didn't know. And you're like, okay.
And Molly, I completely agree. I think that bringing awareness to the situation, because 90% of the time when it happens to me, when I email them, they're just so apologetic, and you can only feel, you can just, okay, well, I mean, this is how I typically do this. This is how I would normally charge for this. If you want to continue using these photos, then X, Y, Z. But I think just bringing awareness to the table, because it really is kind of like a gray area that no one really talks about. And it's not like you can go online and Google search, what do I do when someone infringes my rights? It's like, oh, you go to court, right? No, yeah. It's not that simple. It is.
It's not likely that you'll go to court. I mean, no, and again, that's not to say to everybody, go steal our photos.
Well,
we're not
here's
the
thing.
You, but
when you're talking about someone who took a picture of an avalanche and all of a sudden it's the cover of the Titanic, that's when you might want to go to, court. But it is what it is. And I think,
right.
Grace and awareness and being on top of things. But
the topic of infringement, though.
Yeah.
So, well, to your point, though, the topic of like infringement when it comes to an ad or something like that is also different than, I guess, when something happens on like Instagram or on Pinterest is a big issue now of how, back crediting the photographer for images. I mean, obviously this is something that all photographers go through in the social media age, but how do you maybe recommend, doing the best one can to encourage obviously crediting back photographers, or when you notice an image of yours being reshared from some aggregate Instagram account or on Pinterest, how do you work to chase that down?
I kind of feel like I'm at the point right now where I think the conversation needs to start with the designers themselves too. Like, not only are these other companies, like I'm kind of talking towards vendors, designer vendors and things like that, that always want to share or use that image that, your client, the designer, and we have created, but that content was created for that designer to use for their marketing of their business, right? Like, great that you used that company's sofa in that, but that doesn't mean that company should be able to use that image to sell that sofa continuously, right? Like, you and I, we all know that like our widget is our picture, and we, all these other companies, their widget might be something that they could touch and feel and sell and whatever. When the things that really start to frustrate me is when there's other companies that are actively making money off of images that they haven't paid for, especially big companies. I won't name names, even though I want to, that have marketing budgets that can pay for imagery.
Right.
So I kind of feel like the designers are really starting to get frustrated too, because that's not fair. So I just think it's almost as if we need to start saying like, okay, what partners did you use on this project? Like, let's go to them ahead of time and say, we used 4 different products from your showroom. Do y'all want to go in on the shoot together? And then everybody in theory could potentially be happy because, and to your point, both of you, Katie and Molly, like about the grace thing, like it goes a long way to just ask, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It
just
does.
ask. I'm probably not going to say no if you just want to repost somebody's image. And
However, Jessica, I have a point about that too. If you ever read their rights to the images, they ask for exclusive rights. They ask for like royalty free. And you're like,
yeah,
whoa, a national ad campaign with my photo. I mean, so
No.
I say ask, but up to a certain point. Like they can just ask, but I've been run over by them just asking.
Agreed. I mean, I saw a picture of mine just this week from a national furniture company that was, you know, my photograph, my designer's work, and their little tags all over things you could buy. Like they didn't ask, and you know, and on the one hand, I think that the designer is happy that their name is attached to that larger brand name, but like, is anybody really gonna call you for business from that? Like, at the end of the day, you want to be marketing yourself to people that are going to pick up the phone and use you as an interior designer.
Totally.
That's not the way you're going to find that business. So yes, it's nice that they're sharing your work, but that's not going to make you go to the next level. In my opinion, and from other designers that I've spoken to, it's not the way it should work.
I think that's
Also,
why there needs to be very clear communication as far as like the whole like the vetting process goes. I mean, if you have a designer coming to you and you say no third party rights, this is just personal and promotional, and they start to get afraid, they're like, I don't like those rules, then I'm sorry, that's how I have to protect myself. So as long as there's clear communication happening. Now when someone's being deceptive and they're handing them off to I'll just Bed Bath and Beyond just for fun, you know, whatever, that's when there's a problem, and that's when there's a communication again that needs to be had.
Honestly, that's when you say like, I can't work with that client anymore because I can't risk it.
Well, that's when we talked about setting expectations up front, and that's really a big thing.
Huge.
Something I learned through real estate is, I mean, real estate contracts, there's millions of contracts, right? Millions of documents. I have to most of the time explain those to my clients up front. Like I explain to them clear what their responsibilities are, what my responsibilities are, so on and so forth. I've taken that sort of same strategy and I've rolled that over into photography. But when we sit down and we agree on doing something, I let them know, these are my responsibilities for this photo shoot. These are your responsibilities. And this is what you can do with this after this. And I've only had, and I got burned one good time, and that's when I was like, okay, I've got to figure this out, because I wasn't trained, I didn't have a mentor in this process. But I got burned one good time by a magazine referred me to a designer. I shot the design, the designer paid for the shoot, and then the magazine published it. And then not only did they not acknowledge me, but I asked for a copy of the magazine. She told me to pay for one.
Oh my God.
Like what? But that was one good time. And so from that point on, I said, when I'm working with my clients, we have to have this conversation about how this photo is used, and all the rights and responsibility of me as a photographer, the rights and responsibility of anybody who else is going to handle this, handle the images. And I haven't had that issue since. It's been clear. Just as long as you set those expectations in the beginning.
There's something popping up here in the chat. A photo friend has said to use a service like Pixie and PIXSY to like track your photos, but also that same photo friend, and he and I can have this conversation later, but he basically told a little anecdotal story the other day that he uses infringement as an opportunity to build business. And so I think that is like just funny. He's like, oh, you like this photo enough? Like, do you want to hire me as your photographer for all future shoots? And I think that's kind of clever and funny. And, you know, there's a way to be so nice and good about this. I mean, it's not all like getting your feelings hurt, I think. So, but yeah, I think communicating to our designers, like, also, this is one thing that popped in my mind while you were talking, Jessica, was like, I wonder why the designers tagging, you know, the light fixture and the tile backsplash and everything, because it only gives other people room to copy them. And it seems almost less custom design. I mean, I understand that you want to be featured on that Instagram page or something, but it just feels sort of like now anybody can go replicate your design without having to hire you.
Right.
it kind of does make sense to me.
Yes, talk about that.
So that actually, again, if anyone also has any questions to pop into the chat, but the last sort of one that we haven't spoken about was just how you all managed to develop your editing style and sort of how you built your own style as a photographer compared to still showcasing a designer's style in each project, but also how you manage trends in photography that you might notice from social media trends and what pictures should look like or start to look like on a certain way, and just how you kind of navigate that difference.
That's a really, really great question, because I think that we're all trying to evolve as artists, photographers, designers. And, it's really hard to look at an Instagram and see a photographer with 300,000 followers and they're going all moody and dark and all, and you're like, oh, well, maybe I'm too bright. Well, maybe I should tweak some things here and there. But, trends, they're trends. And being true to yourself is very important. And you're being hired for a reason, for what you bring to the table. And for myself, I mean, I don't even know how I started editing. I know that if I look back at some of my work where I first started, I want to just kind of puke, for lack of a better term, but at the same time also, I've put so many rules on myself now that even though I look back at those photos, they're not so great, but there was something so unique about them, so clean and fresh and free, that, over the course of these 6-7 years of doing this professionally, I'm like, oh no, am I unlearning or am I learning too much? And so I think it's just a healthy balance of trying to figure out what your values are, what your aesthetic is, what you're drawn to, and trying not to allow the, elite Instagrammers to take you off your course.
Agreed. That was a big one for me, is sort of trying to find my own aesthetic. And it was, to get hired when I moved to Atlanta to get hired, I was competing with, Atlanta has its own aesthetic, just its own photography aesthetic, just in general, it's like a cloud that exists over the city. And then one day I just woke up and I was like, stop trying to do them. I said, just do you. And the moment I did that, it just kind of took off. And the second thing, though, to answer your question, is how do you edit projects? I think every project speaks differently, to the editing. Some projects I keep very sort of light and free and airy. In other projects, I enhance the edges of furniture. It just really just depends on the actual project. And again, tying it all back to the story that the designer's trying to tell.
And Clarence, that's correct. I mean, I didn't answer that other part of the conversation. I might be shooting a house where everything is bright and happy. Then you have that one moody library and okay, there's a reason why this place is done this way with a dark blue wallpaper or something like that. So, I mean, you do adjust according to what the client wants from you, and you just feel the space, what the space speaks to you, and then you enhance it. You don't change it, you enhance it. But yeah, exactly, Clarence, I agree with you.
I think knowing how the photos are going to be used is really important too. There's a really, I think that when you shoot super bright, I shoot so bright, and I can afford to do that because my clients typically are using their photos digitally. I'm moving more into editorial and print work. That means I'm going to have to really sharpen up my, the lights are going to have to be recoverable. Not the lights, but the highlights need to be recoverable. Everything needs to be sharp. The saturation needs to be absolutely nailed. I mean, you can't mess with it at all. It has to be really true to tone. So I think when you're editing, again, it's that how are you going to use this photo? Is it for Instagram? Then we're going to brighten it up and get the wow factor and just grab somebody's attention right on the screen and just slap them in the face with a beautiful photo. Or is this, print material, and can we slow down and can we examine where the shadows are falling, where the light's falling, recover that light, edit and shoot to kind of what's all happening. I mean, our eyes are incredible. What we can synthesize with our eyes to understand shadow and light, you can do that photographically. If you can actually capture that, what you're seeing, I think that's when your editing is truly, you're nailing it. If you can get kind of what your eyes can do. Someday they're going to make a camera that's better than eyesight, and then none of us are going to have to edit anymore. It's going to be great.
You bring up an interesting point with Instagram too, because I see there's another question here regarding Instagram about how, oftentimes designers, well, not often, but sometimes designers will share other designers' work or other photographers' work that maybe aren't their own, but inspire them in some way. And I know designers, I follow designers on Instagram who do this to great effect. And then I know some who it kind of gets lost in the water, at least for me, in that I tend to recommend against it unless it's a very stark contrast or a very famous interior that couldn't be confused as your own, in that, because I'm often, going through Instagram and scrolling through looking for projects to maybe follow up on and say, hey, we'd love to see the rest of your home, to look at it for a home tour, maybe for Domino. And so in doing that, it makes it a little bit more convoluted when you're reaching out and then saying, oh, actually, that's not my photo. That's just a friend of, that's a colleague of mine's, who hopefully can put me in touch anyway, because we like the image. But you get a little bit more in the weeds with that, where I think a great alternative to reposting on your own grid or feed people who inspire you's work is to maybe share it in stories where it links back to them.
Or tag
right, and then also credits them to tag
yeah.
through.
And tag the photographer. That never happens.
Well, but yeah, this comes from primarily doing this for the photographer's sake, but
right.
even for designers sharing from another designer's portfolio or from another designer's Instagram feed, I would recommend doing it through stories just to answer this person's question, because it can credit them properly.
I would like to ask that the people who do this, when you're posting other people's work to your Instagram feed, everybody seems to be doing it right now. So I just want to know, are you doing it because you're inspired, or are you trying to fill the holes in your feed?
They're curating.
I know. And I feel like what I'm looking for.
Aren't we all trying to fill the holes in our feed? You know what I mean? I feel like it's kind of like,
it's like what Jessica said, it's feeding the beast.
It's a culture. I mean, I know that sometimes I'll wake up and I know I need to post, but you know what? I don't like all these photos all of a sudden. I just give it up. And, I think that you do bring up a great point about just filling the space. And sometimes it does seem like, oh, wow, it must be easy for someone to just clip a photo from somewhere and throw it right there. And then they're, getting thousands of followers because they're just feeding the beast, right?
Yeah. It also doesn't tell me anything about their design. That's the other thing. It's like, I want to know about you and what you like. How would you have done this differently? Maybe if you're going to do it, don't be critical, but tell me what your spin, your take is on this, not just inspired by so-and-so. It's like, of course we all are. That's why we follow them. Now give us a reason to follow you, because we're already following them. We already saw this picture.
Yeah,
I'm kind of getting on a high horse about this, I think. I'm getting emotional.
I feel like Jessica was going to have a really great response.
That was all of the things that I've sort of noticed on our Q&A, but I never posed this to you for that. Do you have any questions to ask each other or me too that maybe have come up from what we've talked about either? Rather than have you put them in the Q&A box, we can just talk about it here.
I would love to chat with people offline. I don't know that I want to ask anything particularly right now.
That's not exactly the point of this.
Yeah. We all need to exchange the vendors who are using our photos and make sure that we go out, maybe safety's in numbers.
Tim, I think that it's really brilliant that we get to connect with you. I mean, you have a great following as far as Domino Mag. I mean, they're huge. It's a very inspirational magazine to me, and I have not been featured in Domino Mag before, and I know that one day I would love to. But as far as you being, how do you edit things down? How do you edit projects down? And when you say, more often than not, you're not hiring your team to go down there and photograph a project. And I have really great clients, and sometimes it gets passed. Is it everyone's just pitching and pitching?
Yeah, I will say, I mean, because I've worked for a few different design magazines that, as a writer and then as an editor, each of which were very different in terms of style. Like I've written for Apartment Therapy and Martha Stewart Living, and then I was an editor at Architectural Digest, and now being design editor at Domino. There are 4 distinctive styles there for what you're looking for, and a project that's a great fit for one isn't a fit for the other. I do think any design editor will say, or someone who's reviewing projects in that way will say, you get pitched a ton. So just by the volume of it, it's hard to maybe, especially for people that aren't like, some big time interior designer or some hook where a name and a headline is going to make a difference. Even though the project is beautiful, I think it can be hard for that breaking in point. I know at Domino, what I always look for is projects that have a bit more of a human level to them, that aren't necessarily, don't look like museums. I'm always looking at the things that interest me most are the places that feel like real people live here and still it looks great. I mean, I happen to really like a lot of color, whether that's in accessories or, paint or anything of that kind of nature. But I think more than anything else, we're looking for a human element in it. It's why when we cover something of a home tour in Domino, we're mostly looking to speak to the homeowner rather than the interior designer. I mean, obviously both weigh in a project because when it's an interior designer's work, but I think we're really interested in getting to the human aspects of it, which every magazine does this to a degree, but I think at Domino, it's really put at the forefront.
Well, thank you for answering that question. I mean, I feel like there are many people that would love to be featured in Domino, and if I could take any kind of piece or nugget from this, that's great. And
well, hey, I mean, everyone is welcome to pitch me things. I'm going to regret saying this at some point, probably.
Yeah, watch out.
But no, I do look at all home pitches. I will say the best way to literally pitch is to send me an email and say like home tour pitch and have images in the email, or like have a Dropbox in the email, like link in the email or something. Just because if you get sent so many over the course of, I don't know, a week or so, whatever, that just having images available, they're the things you're going to click on first. I mean, just making it easier to kind of notice, like whether there's, like you were all saying, a really striking visual aspect to a home that you want to put that out there. I think that makes a lot of difference.
And as far as the human element goes, I know you're saying that, okay, we want this to feel like someone is living there. They just left the kitchen table with their, whatever they're doing. Is it important for you to have those people for the story as well? So people, the homeowners, photographed, is that always a plus to have in the magazine, or is it kind of like give or take?
You mean to have people in the pictures?
Right, yes.
I think it varies depending on the story, because at the end of this too, I mean, these things start from me seeing pictures, but eventually I had to go interview and write something about it. That I think based on how a story happens, just to make one up, I mean, if someone did a renovation of their kitchen that they have, triplets and need to renovate things that are cost effective because it's a rental apartment, but need to be able to stand up to little kids running around or spills and things. I think that comes with a human element where maybe we want to see the kids, or not the kids necessarily, but like to see the family in the space. But I don't think that necessarily applies to everywhere. I think it's a little bit more of a, what is the angle of the actual story going to be?
Nice.
Great. Well, guys, thank you all so much for taking the time. And if there's any follow-ups, if anyone wants to shout out an Instagram handle or something like that, a way to reach you, you can either put it in the chat or voice it here. But thank you all again. And hope you're all having a great week.
Timothy, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, guys.
Tim. Thanks, Com Collective.
Yes, and thank you, Com Collective, most of all.
That's the shout out.
Yes.
Yeah. Everyone go follow Com Collective.
Yeah.
They're great.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.